Our top story is about China. It is widening the war zone against America, it seems. On the 10th of July, 4 Chinese warships were spotted near Alaska. What brought them into America's exclusive economic zone? Is China preparing for war against the United States? Here's what we know. Early this week, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter was on routine patrol in the Bering Sea when it came across the Chinese military ships. U.S. officials said that the ships were in international waters, but within the U.S. exclusive economic zone. The crew first detected 3 vessels approximately 124 miles, that's 200 kilometers north of the Amchitka Pass in the Aleutian Islands. A while later, a helicopter aircrew from the Coast Guard Air Station Kodiak spotted the 4th Chinese ship. The chopper spotted the Chinese ship approximately 84 miles or 135 kilometers north of the Amchitka Pass. All 4 Chinese vessels were inside the U.S. exclusive economic zone, which extends 200 nautical miles from the shoreline. The Chinese ships reportedly told the U.S. Coast Guard that the purpose for being there was freedom of navigation operations. The U.S. Coast Guard says that the Chinese naval presence operated in accordance with international rules and norms. They said that they met presence with presence to ensure that there were no disruptions to U.S. interests in the maritime environment around Alaska. The U.S. Coast Guard cutter Kimball is a 418-foot ship based in Honolulu. The Coast Guard said that there is no requirement for foreign nations to proactively contact a country before entering their exclusive economic zone. In this case, the Chinese vessels responded when the Coast Guard reached out on radio. The Coast Guard did not say how long the Chinese ships were in America's exclusive economic zone, but said the Kimball and an air crew monitored the Chinese ships until they transited south of the Aleutian Islands and into the North Pacific Ocean. But the sighting of the Chinese ships came a week after the Chinese Navy began its annual joint patrol with the Russian Navy in the Pacific Ocean. Although the patrol is scaled down from previous years, including last August, when more than 10 ships from China and Russia formed a flotilla off Alaska. But here's why Chinese activities in the North American Arctic have left the U.S. worried. In recent years, China's naval forces have expanded rapidly as Beijing seeks to challenge America's dominance in the world's oceans. In fact, China now has more naval ships than the US, even if they have smaller firepower. The encounter in Alaska is a great example of China trying to see just how far they can actually operate without question. China's interest in the Arctic region is consistent with its current geopolitical position and focus on expansionism. Just have a look at what China is doing in the South China Sea. It makes sense that the U.S. questioned their activities. China has been, in fact, regularly monitoring areas of the Arctic more closely than before. But so does the U.S. The U.S. military routinely conducts what it calls freedom of navigation operations. In disputed waters that China claims as its own, the U.S. deploys Navy ships to sail through waterways such as the South China Sea, saying that freedom of navigation in these waters is in America's national interest. So, you see, when the Chinese vessels describe what they are doing as freedom of navigation operations, it is Beijing sending a message to the United States. It is China flexing its muscles by showing up in a part of the world that the U.S. considers part of its sphere of influence. Of course, in the case of the U.S., these islands are clearly part of the U.S. and not a disputed territory. China's increasing presence in the Arctic has left Washington worried. That and the fact that China and Russia are working together to develop the Arctic shipping routes. Russia wants to deliver more oil and gas to China to counter the increased Western sanctions. Meanwhile, China wants to develop new shipping routes in the Arctic and expand its research in Antarctica. But Western governments are wary of China's ambitions. They worry, basically, that the Chinese army could gain better operational and surveillance capabilities from its polar activities. You see, for years now, China has worked to establish footholds in the region. It would give China access to rich mineral deposits and shipping lanes, as well as a greater say in Arctic affairs. And what's more, Arctic presence would also give China strategic presence in a region ringed by US and several other NATO countries. Already, in fact, China has declared itself a near-Arctic state, a designation that it has invented in a way to push for a greater role in the Arctic. It has sent research expeditions. It has sought to establish mining and gas operations. It envisions a network of shipping routes crossing the Arctic and a Silk Road on ice in collaboration with Russia. But in the Arctic, the US sees China as a potentially destabilizing force. In America's Arctic strategy released in 2022, pays particular attention to the risk of China using commercial or scientific access to the Arctic for military advantage. As a counter, the US has now roped in its allies, Canada and Finland, from what is being called an ice pact, a coalition to basically project American influence into Arctic region. Now, under the ice pact, they will build a fleet of polar icebreaker ships that will basically challenge China's control of the market. The pact was announced during the NATO summit in Washington this week. It could see as many as 90 icebreaker ships produced by the three countries in the coming years. And this is America's answer to Russia and China's Arctic collaboration. The two countries signed an agreement, remember, to cooperate in the Arctic last year. Russia currently has the largest Arctic fleet. It's 40 ships, far outpacing both the US and Canada. And the next few years will be a crucial test in the Arctic, to say the least. There are opportunities to cooperate on, such as on climate change. On paper, both China and America have expressed commitment to ensuring the Arctic remains a region of peace and stability. But with the geopolitical tensions running so high, and given the US and China's rivalry, encounters like the one that happened in Alaska this week could just become routine. To stay up to speed with the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.